Hi, I'm Dr. Rose Anne Reynolds, and today I'm sharing a chapter from my PhD. My thesis is entitled A Post-Human Reconfiguring of Philosophy with Children in a Government Primary School in South Africa. And what I'm sharing today is the methodology that guides my work. It is a chapter in my post-qualitative PhD entitled Remembering as a Sacred Practice. If you look at the background, and the entire presentation has images of crochet as the background, my crochet and knitting during the process of my PhD have been a bodily act of remembering. I have used images from a blanket I have crocheted throughout my PhD as the canvas for this presentation to hold this work of remembering. The double knit stitch used throughout the piece looks the same in front and at the back, so the piece is never the right way up. For which way is that? Deleuze and Guattari draw a comparison between knitting and crochet, suggesting that in knitting, the needles produce a striated space. One of them plays the role of the warp, the other of the woof, but by turns. Crochet, on the other hand, draws an open space in all directions, a space that is prolongable in all directions, but still has a center. In this presentation, I am present with feminist and quantum physicist Karen Barad, whose work I draw on deeply, who urges us to recognize that memory is not a record of a fixed past that can ever be fully or simply erased, written over, or recovered. The memories I share today are not mine. They are not held in my individual head or body and now shared by my voice through the speakers of the devices you are listening with and through. Rather, these memories are the enfolded articulations of the universe in its mattering. That's Barad 2007. These memories will be alive. They are alive, continuous enactments of a changing universe. I am not turning back to look at these memories, and they are not dropping into this present. They are already here, but gone, already past, but different. The title of this presentation, Remembering as a Sacred Practice, comes from a quote in a paper by Karen Barad in 2017, page 70, which weighs deeply on my thinking body. I found thinking about remembering as re-membering a powerful way to attend to entanglements of colonialism, militarism, racism, and conservatism, which emerged through the retellings of different parts of various stories of growing up in South Africa. The sacred practice, as understood through temporal diffraction, encompasses multiple iterations of sacredness. As Barad, 2017, page 67 says, temporalities are specifically tangled and threaded through one another. I grew up in South Africa during apartheid. I endured apartheid education and compulsory schooling as a child and teenager. Can I draw your attention to the image, the markers of compulsory schooling? This is an image of my sister, my cousin, and I at three different schools. I am in the blue uniform, my sister in the grey and yellow uniform next to me, and my cousin on the far left of the image. We are all wearing different uniforms, but we are all wearing black shoes and variations of white socks, varying in length and how they are worn. All our hair is tamed and tied up in bows, plaited away from our faces, neat, straight fringes away from our eyes, suitcases to carry the government issued books. I then became a teacher in this same system, on the same colonized land, divided, carved up, and scarred by apartheid policies and practices. This is not a story or a sanitized history, but a remembering of a life as a child of apartheid and a teacher growing out through and beyond that system in post apartheid South Africa, where the post is not past. I think with Fikile Kumalo, who in her PhD written in 2014 suggested she would do a partial telling of my own place learning from my childhood and youth. Close quotes. I too will write a partial telling, a remembering as a sacred practice from Barad, because I will not be going back in time, but embodying and enacting a material reconfiguring of the life I lived as a child and as an adult in South Africa. Continuing to draw on the work of Karen Barad, I use travel hopping, which can be understood as temporal diffraction, as a methodology in my thesis. In order to understand travel hopping, it is important to understand temporal diffraction as developed through Barad's diffractive reading of queer theory through quantum field theory. Quantum field theory troubles time as it is understood through Western metaphysics. Temporal diffraction is based on the empirical finding that, according to Barad 2017, page 67, a given particle can be in a state of indeterminately coexisting at multiple times, for example, coexisting in the past, present, and futures. The implications for this doctoral research project are that it requires us to think about time and therefore childhood very differently, as we would need to think of temporal diffraction as an ontological indeterminacy of time. I will use travel hopping as opposed to a linear account of my schooling and apartheid schooling, including post 1994, to allow the differences and entanglements to emerge. According to Barad 2017, page 70, what is at stake is not setting time aright, as if that were possible, but rather the undoing of time, of universal time, of the notion that moments exist one at a time, everywhere the same, and replace one another in succession. What I have been remembering is not a linear chronology. I'm not trying to remember where I was and what I was doing or what was occurring in the world. Numbers and dates can give the impression that it is a retelling, like placing the pieces of a puzzle together. This is not the case. When I write or speak about 1967, 1982, 1985, 1990, 2017, these are not just dates fixed on a line representing a before, after, or even a fixed space in a given past or promised future. The number line is a concept in its becoming. In this presentation, the materiality of the numbers and how they perform as concepts on the number line change how the writing and reading happens. De Freitas and Sinclair go further to suggest reimagining how we work with number lines in schools and recasting them as elastic. This concept excites me because of what it means in terms of the indeterminacy of numbers. They are virtual real numbers embedded between whole numbers. So now a number line becomes a quivering space of potential rather than an interval contained between two fixed points. What is required then is a different kind of reading about 1985, 1990, 2017, 2020. These are not fixed points, rather they are possibilities. The number line then becomes alive, vibrant through the indeterminacy buried in and emerging from it. I was born in 1977 at Bethesda Hospital, a mission hospital in Ubombo, a small rural town in northern KwaZulu-Natal, South Africa, 1,812 kilometers from Cape Town. From 1975 to 1980, my father, who is a medical doctor, worked at the mission hospital serving the rural community. My mother, a teacher, managed a preschool from the back porch of our home. In 1980, when my older sister turned 6, she needed to begin compulsory schooling. Apartheid policies dictated that she could only attend a school for children classified as coloured by the apartheid government. There was no school that permitted coloured children close to where we lived in Ubombo. This apartheid policy pushed my parents to make the decision to move back to Cape Town. However, in Cape Town, we could only live in an area demarcated as a coloured area by the Group Areas Act number 36 of 1966. This act enforced segregation by assigning geographical living and working areas to specific racial categories designated by apartheid legislation and practices. The act also restricted ownership and occupation of land to specific apartheid racial groups. I was classified with my family as coloured by the apartheid government, but I would self-identify as a black South African. I am and am not the child in the photograph. This is a photograph of me as a child, but he's not a child, even though when we look at the image, we see a child. When we have a concept, child in this instance, it does not refer to just one thing in the world, but a phenomenon. This is a partial telling of my own places and spaces. I am not an individual, solitary, or bounded subject, but rather I am part of the phenomena which make up this child and childhood. I think with philosopher Walter Cohen, who argues that in our daily life, words like child and adult are presented as common, normal, simple. A focus of this presentation is how the concepts of child and childhood can be reimagined. Like Cohen, I use philosophy to recognize the arbitrary in the natural, the contingency in the necessary, the extraordinary in the ordinary. So I will work to rethink concepts like child and adult as if they can exist without each other, and how they tend to be normalized and simplified. I will also try to trace the entanglements of the delicate complexity of my childhood that is not past or gone, and my adulthood that is not fixed or stable. I am and am not the child in the photograph. In this image is a photograph of my grade 1 notebook, my a writing notebook. Do you remember your grade 1 notebooks? Are there similarities or differences? How different from your own children's books? The order from left to right, the pattern of A's copied off the board, teacher modeling, then student repeating. Spend a moment with this image. Think about, how does the alphabet work? These separated letters, the size of the book cut to an A5 size, the difference and repetition, the pattern, the date, 30.11.82, the violence embedded in the letters, the justification of corporal punishment in South Africa, the language of English, the language of the colonizer, coloniality lingers, and oppression, the oppressive state of the letters forced to only exist and be validated if they can exist between the lines. In this brief presentation, I have remembered life during state legislated apartheid South Africa through a retelling of my childhood and primary years. I have tried to trace the material discursive entanglements of the human and more than human encounters through images, rememberings, dates, and numbers. Numbers and dates have been explored as concepts in their becoming. There's been an effort to reclaim concepts as creative, indeterminate material forces, according to De Freitas and Sinclair. The difference it makes in regard to lines of numbers as stylistic for my methodology is the possibilities it creates for seeing the past not as closed but as open, open to multiple forces, to the entanglements that disrupt the ideas of time and space being containers, which so often are the only way we work with child and in early childhood education. I have attempted to disrupt age as a category of exclusion and bring to the fore the entanglement of the humans like child, more specifically black, who are generally excluded from retelling their stories for research, as they are usually the subjects of the research. Thank you very much.